Good evening, and welcome back to SleepWise. Tonight, we drift into a feeling that arrives without knocking, the way a soft change in weather can slip beneath the door. It can come while you're brushing your teeth, or folding a shirt, or standing at the sink with the tap running, listening to the ordinary sounds of your own life. And then, suddenly, you miss something, not in a sharp way, but in a tender way, like warmth remembered through a window, a sweetness with a small ache tucked inside it. That is nostalgia, and it is one of the mind's most gentle tricks, to take time, which never returns, and let it brush your cheek for a moment anyway. For some of us, it sometimes wears the colors of the 80s or the 90s, a certain glow, a certain pace, a certain kind of quiet in the background. But nostalgia isn't really about a decade or a hairstyle or a song or a gadget that once sat on a shelf. It's about the way your brain keeps a drawer of then, and how easily that drawer can slide open when you're tired or changing or simply soft enough to feel. Nostalgia often arrives when the mind has less to defend, when the day's conversations have faded, when the room is dim enough that even your thoughts speak more softly. And the feeling itself is curious, because it isn't pure happiness. It can hold comfort and sadness in the same palm, and somehow the mixture feels safe. Psychologists often call nostalgia a bittersweet emotion, and that word is accurate in the simplest way, sweet, because it carries love, and bitter because it carries distance. Yet even the bitter part can be kind, because it reminds you that you have belonged, and that you can belong again. So tonight, we won't rush it, and we won't turn it into trivia. We'll just let it unfold slowly and notice what it's trying to do for you. Because nostalgia isn't only longing, it's also stitching. It's the mind searching for continuity, looking for the thread that connects who you were to who you are to who you're becoming. And in that quiet work, something often settles. The world slows, and so do we. If you listen closely, nostalgia is not asking you to go back. It is asking you to remember what mattered and to carry a small piece of it forward into tomorrow. Not the whole past, just one gentle detail, a sound, a color, a feeling of being safe for a moment. That is enough for now. So get comfortable, let your shoulders drop, and let your breathing find its natural rhythm again. In a moment, we'll step into a gentle time capsule, not to live there, but to notice how easily the senses can open a door. We'll begin at the edge of the present with one small familiar glow, and follow it gently wherever it leads tonight. Tonight, we step just a little out of the present, not far, only to the edge where memory begins to glow. You enter a living room that feels smaller than you remember, and warmer too, as if the air has been held in place by years of familiar evenings. A lamp pools light over a coffee table, and the rest of the room is gentle shadow, the kind that makes corners feel safe. There's a television across the room, not silent exactly, but breathing, a faint hum, a soft electrical whisper, the sense of a screen warming up before it speaks. The picture has edges you can feel, a slight shimmer, a quiet flicker, and if you look closely, you can almost see the lines that build the image, like a story being drawn again and again. You don't scroll for something to watch. You simply arrive at whatever is on, and that surrender is oddly soothing, like lying back in a river and letting it carry you. The night has a schedule. A show begins because it is time, not because you chose it. And the world, for a moment, stops asking you to customize yourself. On a shelf, there might be a stack of tapes, their cases clicked shut, or a few bright spines of movies lined up like small promises. There's a remote with worn buttons, shiny from use, and you know exactly where volume is without looking. Maybe the carpet catches on your toes. Maybe the couch holds a faint smell of fabric warmed by bodies and popcorn, by years of being the place where people leaned closer during quiet parts. Outside, the street is darker than streets feel now. Fewer glowing rectangles in hands, fewer constant updates in the air, just porch lights, and the occasional car passing like a slow wave of sound. The room doesn't need to be exciting. It only needs to be steady. And steadiness is what nostalgia loves. The feeling that life had a rhythm you could hear even when you weren't trying. In the 80s and 90s, many evenings were stitched together by small repeating cues. A theme song that told your body it was time to settle in. A commercial jingle you learned without meaning to. The soft click when the channel changed, as if the world itself had a dial you could turn. And notice what your mind does with this scene. It smooths the rough parts. It keeps the glow. It keeps the sense that the night was held in a frame instead of spilling everywhere at once. Because nostalgia is not a camera. It is a lantern. It doesn't light everything. It lights what mattered. And in this room, what mattered was the feeling of being contained. Not trapped, contained. As if time had walls, and you could rest inside them. Take a slow breath here. Let the screen's soft flicker become like a nightlight in your mind. In a moment, we'll move from the glow of the room to the rituals that shape the days, the small waits, the little pauses, the way life arrived in footsteps, not in endless streams. Now the scene shifts, not with a cut, but with a gentle turn. Because nostalgia is rarely just a picture. It's a rhythm. And in the 80s and 90s, so much of life was made of waiting that didn't feel like punishment. It felt like the normal shape of time. You pick up a phone and hear the dial tone, a clean, steady note that means the line is open. Sometimes you hear the busy signal, quick and insistent, and you learn patience in small doses, as if the world is teaching you to try again later. Messages don't arrive in a silent pocket. They live on an answering machine, a little cassette that clicks and whirs, and you press play with a kind of hope. Photographs are not endless. They are precious. You take them sparingly because you can't see them right away. You wait before you hold them in your hands, still smelling faintly of paper, little rectangles of proof that a moment happened. And if you don't like one, you don't delete it. You tuck it away, and years later, it becomes a surprise, a version of you you'd forgotten. There are errands that are also ceremonies. Returning a movie means driving to a place, walking through a door, reading the spines, choosing carefully, committing. You carry the choice home in a plastic case, and it feels heavier than a thumbnail on a screen, like a promise you can feel in your palm. Tapes must be rewound. Time is physical there, wound on spools, and you can hear it moving when you press the button. There's something comforting about the whir, a reminder that stories have beginnings, middles, endings, and a quiet return to start. Even music arrives with friction. You wait by the radio for the right song. You catch it halfway through and still feel lucky. You press record at the perfect moment and hold your breath so you don't ruin it. And that small effort turns the song into something personal. Life has fewer shortcuts, and so it leaves more footprints. You walk to places. You knock on doors. You meet people without announcing yourself first. And here's the quiet truth inside all that waiting. The pauses were not empty. They were the glue between moments. They gave your mind time to file the day into neat little folders. School, home, weekend, summer. The world moved in chapters you could sense. And when time comes in chapters, it becomes easier to remember. So if your chest softens at the slowness of it, it makes sense. Your nervous system learned that waiting could be safe, that not knowing could be temporary, that good things could take a little while and still arrive. Let that thought settle. In a moment, we'll follow the soundtrack that ties all of this together, the way certain songs can lift an entire room into place, as if time has been folded carefully and stored. And then, almost automatically, the music begins. Not as background, but as a doorway. One note can do it. A drum fill, a synth line, a guitar that rings like a small bell. And suddenly, you are somewhere else, standing in a hallway, sitting in the back seat, staring out a window while streetlights pass in slow, steady beads. In the 80s and 90s, music had a particular way of arriving. It wasn't always on demand. Sometimes you waited for it, the way you waited for a friend, hopeful, patient, listening. You learned the rhythm of radio stations, the times they played certain songs, the way a DJ's voice might hover over the intro if you weren't lucky. And when the song finally came, it felt like a gift. There were mixtapes, too. Not just collections, but care made audible. Someone choosing a first track on purpose. Someone lining up a mood. Someone leaving a little space between songs where the tape hiss breathed. Sometimes The tape had mistakes, a late start, a clipped ending, a faint sound in the room when the record button was pressed. And those flaws made it more real, more yours. CDs arrived like small mirrors. You held them up to the light and watched color travel across the surface as if the future had been poured into a circle. You flipped through a wallet of discs in a car, the plastic sleeves warm from the sun, and choosing one felt like choosing the tone of the whole drive. There were music videos, too, and for a while they were a kind of shared campfire. People knew the same images, the same dances, the same chorus, even if their lives were completely different. And because the same songs returned again and again, they became stamps pressed into memory. Repetition is one of the brain's favorite ways to decide what matters. So a chorus you heard 100 times did not become boring. It became familiar. And familiarity, when life feels uncertain, is almost the same thing as safety. Notice how quickly your body responds to this, how the shoulders loosen when a beloved song appears, how a certain melody can make your breathing slower, even before you understand why. That is not weakness. That is your nervous system recognizing a path it has walked before. And the past, in these moments, doesn't feel like a distant land. It feels close enough to touch, as if the air itself has remembered. Stay here for a breath. Let the imagined music soften into the room around you. And then, gently, let it fade. Because the point of this time capsule is not to live inside it. It is to notice how simple cues, a sound, a texture, a glow, can lift an entire chapter of your life into the present. Next, we'll turn the lantern toward the science very softly and ask why these cues work so well and why certain years seem to hold more firsts than others, and why nostalgia often visits when you need it most. What just happened in your mind is more than mood. It is a system, a gentle one, built for a species that had to remember where the water was, who was safe, and what to do when the season changed. Your brain is constantly deciding what to keep. Not everything can be stored in detail, so memory works the way a careful traveler packs. Essentials first, then a few objects that carry meaning. And the cues we just touched, glow, waiting, music, are powerful because memory is not filed like a library by date. It is filed like a map. A sound can be a street corner. A smell can be a doorway. A texture can be a staircase. Scientists call this cue-dependent memory, and the idea is simple. When the cue returns, the mind can find the whole room again. This is why nostalgia can arrive so suddenly. You don't choose it. You brush against a cue, and the past answers. But there is another reason. Certain stretches of life feel louder in memory than others. Many people find that adolescence and early adulthood hold an unusual density of firsts. First freedoms. First friendships that felt like home. First heartbreaks that rearranged your inner furniture. first moments of realizing you might become someone specific. The brain pays attention to novelty, and firsts are novelty with emotion attached. So they get tagged more strongly. They are stored with richer threads, music, places, faces, weather, the exact feeling of the air. This is also why a decade can become a shorthand for belonging. Not because the decade was perfect, but because that is when your identity was being written in fresh ink. And repetition deepens the groove. A song you heard weekly, a show you watched in the same chair, a route you walked every day. These patterns are like stitches. They bind memory to the body. They teach your nervous system what normal feels like. So later, when life becomes louder, faster, less predictable, the mind reaches for those patterns the way a hand reaches for a railing in the dark. Nostalgia is often misread as weakness, as if longing means you can't handle the present. But psychologists have found that nostalgia can serve a purpose. It can increase a sense of meaning, warm the feeling of social connection, and soften loneliness. It can remind you that you have been loved and that you have survived changes before. In that way, nostalgia is not only about the past, it is a resource the mind uses in the present. A small internal blanket pulled up when the air feels cold. And that's why it often arrives at night, when the day's demands finally loosen. The mind has space to wander and to soothe itself. As we continue, we'll keep the tone gentle and learn how to let nostalgia comfort you without letting it carry you away. For now, notice this. Your mind is trying to take care of you in quiet ways. Tonight, we turn the lantern a little closer and notice something quietly surprising. When you remember you are not opening a vault and taking out a perfect recording. You are rebuilding a scene like a set being assembled in the dark, using a few sturdy beams and a lot of gentle guesswork. The brain is not trying to deceive you. It is trying to be efficient. There are too many minutes in a life to store them all in full detail, so memory keeps the outline, the emotion, the meaning, and it lets the small facts blur at the edges. This is why two people can share the same afternoon and remember it differently. It is also why you can return to an old place and feel both comforted and confused. Your memory brings back the feeling, but the world offers new details, and the two do not always match. And each time you recall an event, the memory becomes a little more like the act of recalling it. The story gains polish. The rough pieces get sanded down. The mind keeps what supports the theme and quietly releases what does not. Sometimes it even fills small gaps without asking permission, because a coherent story feels safer than a scattered one. That filling in is usually gentle, not a lie you choose, just the mind smoothing the seam. This is one reason nostalgia can feel smoother than real life ever felt. The past, in memory, is often edited into something with clearer light and fewer sharp corners. not because it was easy, because you survived it and your brain learned what to save. There is also a tenderness in the way memory compresses time. Long summers become a single golden afternoon. Whole years become a handful of scenes, strung together like lights. The mind is not counting days, it is counting moments that mattered. So, when nostalgia pulls you toward an era, it is not only calling you toward the culture, it is calling you toward the version of you that lived inside those moments. The one who was smaller or braver or more uncertain or more open. The one who was still learning the shape of the world. And if you feel an ache, it may not be for the objects or the songs. It may be for the simplicity of being in the middle of becoming. Hold that gently, because the purpose of this episode is not to prove that the past was better. It is to understand why the past can feel close and why closeness can be comforting. In a moment, we'll notice why nostalgia often arrives at night, when the house is quieter and the mind has room to drift. For now, let one thought settle. Your memory is not a museum. It is a garden, constantly tended, constantly replanted, always growing around what you need to carry forward. And like any garden, it looks different in different seasons. Tonight, we simply notice the shape of it and let it be enough. Nostalgia often chooses the late hours for a simple reason. At night, the world stops demanding that you be efficient. There are fewer messages arriving, fewer tasks to juggle, fewer eyes on you. The mind finally has room to wander without being interrupted, and wandering is where memory likes to surface. During the day, attention is pulled outward. You are steering, solving, responding, moving. But in the evening, the body begins to downshift. Light dims, noise softens, and the brain starts to change its priorities from doing to digesting. Even your breathing tends to slow when the room is quiet, and the nervous system reads that slowness as permission. Nostalgia can be part of that permission, not as a trap, but as a way of regulating emotion. When the day has been sharp, the mind searches for something familiar and warm. When the day has been lonely, the mind searches for connection. And when the day has been confusing, the mind searches for coherence, a story that makes sense. This is why nostalgia is so often linked with belonging. A remembered kitchen, a remembered laugh, a remembered drive at dusk can briefly restore the feeling that you are held by life, not only pushing against it. There is also something gentle about the body's chemistry in the evening. As you become tired, the mind becomes a little less rigid. The same thoughts you would reject at noon can be accepted at midnight. You become more willing to feel, and feeling is the doorway nostalgia uses. Sometimes nostalgia arrives because you are changing. A new job, a new home, a new season, a new responsibility. When the present is unfamiliar, the brain reaches back for a reliable template. It says, quietly, remember how you have lived before. Remember that you have adapted before. This is not weakness. It is the nervous system doing its quiet work of stabilizing you. And notice how nostalgia rarely arrives with perfect detail. It arrives with atmosphere, a color in the air, a sound in the distance, a sense of then that sits beside now for a moment, like two cups on the same table. If you let it, it can soften you. It can loosen the knot of the day and make the present feel less lonely, simply because it reminds you that you have a history. So tonight, we allow it to pass through like a warm current. We don't chase it and we don't fight it. We just notice that it comes most easily when the lights are low and the world is kind enough to be quiet. Some scientists believe that in these quieter hours, the brain also begins its nightly housekeeping, sorting experiences, strengthening some connections, letting others fade. Nostalgia can ride along with that sorting, like a label placed gently on a box. Keep this. Now, let's talk about a doorway that is almost unfairly powerful. Scent, a smell, does not need to explain itself. It simply arrives, and your body recognizes it before your mind has time to argue. A trace of laundry soap can bring back a childhood hallway. A certain sunscreen can place you on a beach you haven't seen in years. A whiff of gasoline can summon a night drive, windows down, air moving fast and cool. This happens because smell is wired in a way that is intimate and ancient. Unlike many senses, it does not rely as heavily on words. You can describe a color or a shape more easily than a smell. So scent tends to reach you as pure feeling, and pure feeling is exactly what nostalgia is made of. A smell can skip the usual checkpoints. It doesn't knock politely at the front door of logic. It slips in through the side gate and turns on the lights. That is why scent memories often feel vivid, sudden, and physical. You don't just remember the scene. You become the person who was in it. Your posture shifts. Your throat tightens or loosens. Your chest warms. And for a moment, the present goes quiet while the past speaks. In the 80s and 90s, for many people, these scents have their own tiny library. Plastic warmed by a sunlit dashboard, the sweetness of a certain shampoo, the powder of a certain lotion, the papery smell of a fresh cassette insert or a comic book page, the faint ozone of electronics, a room where a screen has been on for hours. But the decade is only one coat the feeling can wear. The deeper truth is that the brain ties smell to context with a tight knot. Because smells once mattered for survival. Smoke meant danger. Food meant energy. A familiar body scent meant safety. And so, the brain treats smell like a priority signal. When that signal returns, the whole scene can return with it. If you want to use nostalgia gently, scent is one of the softest ways. You can choose a candle, a tea, a soap, a spice, and let it become a calm anchor, not to escape the present, but to bring the warmth of continuity into it. Because nostalgia is at its best when it comforts without consuming. So tonight, just imagine one scent you love. Let it pass through your mind like a warm breeze. Notice what room it opens. Notice what version of you steps forward. And then, without forcing anything, let the door swing back to the present. No effort required. Just a breath, a memory, and a gentle return. Places hold memories the way shelves hold books. Not because the walls remember, but because you do. And you file parts of yourself by where you were when you became them. A school corridor, a corner store, a bedroom with posters on the wall, a staircase you ran down when you heard someone come home. When you return to a place like that, something in you can wake up all at once. You don't need to think hard. Your body already knows the route. Your feet know where to turn. Your eyes know where the light falls, and your mind begins to retrieve details it hasn't used in years. This is another form of cue-dependent memory, only now the cue is an entire landscape. Some neuroscientists describe the brain as keeping a kind of inner map. It tracks where you are and where you have been, not only in geography, but in emotion. So, a familiar street can act like a shortcut, leading you to memories that were stored nearby, as if the mind clustered them together. The place becomes an address, and the address brings back what was living there. In the 80s and 90s, there were places that shaped the rhythm of belonging for many people. The video rental store with its rows and categories, the quiet bargaining with yourself as you chose one tape. The mall, bright and climate-controlled, a small indoor world where people drifted without needing a reason. The arcade, darker, louder, full of blinking lights that felt like a secret language. But even if your memories come from different decades, you still know this feeling. A place can pull a whole mood out of storage. You can walk into an old neighborhood and feel instantly that time has folded. The air feels thicker with meaning. The smallest details become emotional. A mailbox, a tree, the pattern of tiles on a porch. And here is the gentle twist. Sometimes the place has changed. A store has become something else. A street is wider. A building is gone. A sign is new. And the ache you feel is not only sadness. It is the mind meeting the fact that the world moves on even when your memory is still standing in the old layout. That ache can be tender because it proves you were there. You lived something that mattered enough to be stored. So if you ever feel drawn to revisit a place, you can do it like a meditation. Not to chase the exact past, which is impossible, but to let the mind observe what it retrieves, to notice which parts of you come forward, to greet them kindly, and then to thank the present for being the place where you are still alive, still gathering moments. Next, we'll talk about the small objects that carry time. Why a photograph, a ticket, or a worn piece of clothing can feel heavier than its weight, and why touch can make memory feel real. There are objects that seem to carry more time than matter. A photograph, slightly faded at the edges. A ticket stub that once lived in a pocket, a sweater with a familiar softness, worn thin at the cuffs where your hands used to hide. These things are small, but the mind treats them like keys, because memory loves what you can touch. Touch is immediate. It is proof. Sometimes, when you open an old box, you notice the scent first: cardboard, paper, a faint hint of dust, and time. Even that smell is a cue, and it can summon a whole season. And when your fingers move over an old surface, the brain receives a stream of information that photographs alone cannot provide. Texture, temperature, tiny scratches. These are the small facts the body remembers, and the body often remembers faster than the mind. When you hold an object from another chapter of your life, your senses gather around it and begin to reconstruct the scene it came from. The mind is doing what it always does, building a room from a few strong beams. And objects provide excellent beams. In the 80s and 90s, there were objects that became little time capsules almost by accident. A cassette with handwritten labels, ink slightly smeared, a stack of photo prints in an envelope, names scribbled on the back, a game cartridge, its edges softened from being pulled in and out, the plastic warmed by countless hands, a phone cord coiled like a spring, stretching across a room while someone talked for too long and no one minded. But the specific item doesn't matter as much as the principle. An object holds context. It holds the shape of your hands at that time. It holds the habits you had, the places you lived, the people you were close to. It is a piece of the world that has traveled with you, quietly, while everything else changed. This is why people keep boxes in closets, not because they plan to live in the past, but because the objects inside those boxes can restore a sense of continuity. They say, "You have been here before. You have loved, you have tried, you have learned, you have endured." And sometimes that reminder is exactly what the present needs. If you want to use nostalgia gently, choose one object that brings you warmth without pulling you into ache. Hold it for a moment. Notice the texture. Notice the weight. Let the memory come if it wants to, and if it doesn't, that is fine too. Then place the object back down with a quiet respect, the way you would set down a glass without making a sound. Because the goal is not to cling. The goal is to feel supported. Next, we'll step from objects into people. How nostalgia becomes social glue. Why shared memories reduce loneliness, and why the past often feels safer when it is held together, not alone. Now we step from objects into something even warmer, because nostalgia is rarely only private. It is, quite often, a social emotion, a way the mind reminds you that you have been part of something and that you still can be. Think of how a single phrase can pull laughter out of nowhere. An old nickname, a school chant, a line from a movie everyone quoted until it became a secret handshake. You don't even have to explain it. The meaning arrives fully formed, and the room feels closer. Shared memories do something simple and powerful. They shrink the distance between people. They turn I into we, and we is one of the brain's favorite words because we once meant survival. In a group, you were safer. You had more eyes watching, more hands gathering, more warmth at night. So the mind treats belonging like a nutrient. And nostalgia, when it is shared, is a quick way to feed that hunger. This is why people tell old stories at weddings, why families repeat the same funny moment each holiday as if it happened yesterday, why friends can spend hours remembering a single summer even if the details are fuzzy. The details don't matter as much as the feeling. The feeling is the point. When you remember with someone else, you are also being seen. You're reminded that your past is real because another person carries a piece of it too. Even disagreement can be soothing. You say it happened one way, they insist it happened another, and you both laugh because the argument itself proves you were there together. Nostalgia can also soften loneliness in a quiet way. Even if no one is physically beside you, remembering a shared moment can bring the sensation of company. A laugh you heard once can echo again. A voice can return with surprising clarity. A car ride, a kitchen, a hallway, and the sense that you are not alone in your own story. In the 80s and 90s, many people shared the same cultural cues, and that created a special kind of communal nostalgia. Songs that played everywhere, shows that everyone watched at the same time, big events that became conversational landmarks. But the deeper truth is not about the decade. It is about synchrony. When many people experience the same thing, the memory becomes a bridge between strangers. And when you feel that bridge, the nervous system relaxes. Because isolation is heavy and connection lightens it. So tonight, if nostalgia brings up a person, let it be gentle. You don't have to chase them. You don't have to reopen every door. You can simply notice the warmth that memory carries. You can let yourself feel grateful that the bond existed at all. And if you choose, you can do one small thing with it. Send a message, share a photo, say hello. Because nostalgia at its best doesn't trap you. It connects you. Next, we'll look at why nostalgia tends to rise during change, when life is shifting under your feet and the mind reaches for something steady. Change is one of the surest invitations nostalgia knows. It doesn't matter whether the change is big or small. A move, a new job, a new city, a birthday that lands differently than you expected. Sometimes it's quieter than that. A friend drifting a little farther away, a season turning, a new routine settling into your bones. When life changes, the mind becomes more aware that time is moving. And that awareness can feel like standing near the edge of something wide, where the future is open and the ground feels less certain. So the brain does what it has always done in wide spaces. It looks for landmarks. It looks for stability. The past becomes a landmark simply because it is known. You already survived it. You already learned its rules. You already made sense of it once. So nostalgia rises as a form of steadying, not because the present is wrong, but because the present is new. Sometimes nostalgia is triggered by responsibility. When life becomes heavier, when you are managing more, carrying more, deciding more, you may long for a time when you were held more often than you were holding. That longing is not childish. It is human. It is the mind remembering what it felt like to be taken care of, and quietly asking whether you can offer yourself some of that care now. Sometimes nostalgia is triggered by uncertainty. The future becomes blurry and the mind turns to the past because the past is a story with an ending. The brain likes completed stories. They feel safer than open loops. And if you listen closely, nostalgia during change is often not asking you to go back. It is asking you to bring something forward, a sense of play, a sense of simplicity, a particular kind of closeness, a pace that felt breathable. For many listeners, the 80s and 90s can become a symbol of that pace, not because life was perfect, but because life often had clearer edges, fewer streams of information, more boundaries, more moments that ended because they had to end. But the decade is only a costume. The deeper need is rhythm, a life with pauses where the mind can rest between chapters. You might notice it in small moments. You fold clothes in a new place and your hands remember an older drawer. You take a different road and your mind plays the old route anyway, as if it were checking in on a former version of you. These are not mistakes. They are the brain trying to keep a map while the landscape shifts. So, if nostalgia has been visiting you lately, treat it like a weather report, not a command, just information. It says, you are in a shifting season. Be kind to yourself and make the present a little steadier where you can. Let it point gently toward what you need more of now. Softness, steadiness, connection, and then let it guide you back to today. There is a reason nostalgia can feel like comfort. It is not only poetic, it is practical. The mind and body are always in conversation, and emotion is one of the languages they use to keep you steady. When you feel stressed, your system narrows. Attention tightens, thoughts repeat, and the body prepares for difficulty. Even if the difficulty is only a deadline or a worry you carry quietly. In those moments, nostalgia can act like a gentle widening. It reminds you of context. It says, you are more than this hour. You have a whole life behind you full of proof that you have made it through days you once thought were impossible. This is one reason nostalgia can increase a sense of meaning. Meaning is not the same as happiness. Meaning is the feeling that your life is coherent, that your experiences connect, that you belong to a story that makes sense. When stress makes everything feel fragmented, nostalgia can stitch the pieces together. It can also increase social warmth. Even a solitary nostalgic memory tends to include people, friends, family, classmates, strangers in the background of a shared moment. Remembering those scenes can reduce loneliness for a little while because the nervous system responds to imagined connection more than we expect. Nostalgia can even make some people feel more optimistic, not in a forced way, in a grounded way, because it reminds you that the future has arrived before, and you handled it, and you learned. You have evidence of resilience. Evidence is calming. This is why nostalgia so often visits during difficult times. When the world is uncertain, the mind reaches for a warm internal resource, the memory of being safe, of being loved, of being held by routine. The memory becomes a small shelter, and like any shelter, it is meant for resting, not for living permanently. Here is a gentle way to tell the difference. When nostalgia supports you, it leaves you softer, steadier, more capable of returning to the present. When nostalgia traps you, it leaves you restless, comparing today to a past that has been carefully edited. So tonight, we practice a simple relationship. We let nostalgia be a warm cup, not a locked room. We sip it slowly, feel the warmth, and then set it down, noticing that the present is still here, still waiting to be lived. If you want, try something small right now. Bring to mind a memory that feels kind, not the sharpest one, not the one that hurts, just a scene where you felt safe, even briefly. Notice your breathing. Notice whether your shoulders drop a little. That is regulation, your nervous system responding to familiarity. And in that response, you can see why humans are nostalgic. We are built to seek safety, belonging, and meaning, and nostalgia can offer a little of all three. If you look back on a trip, you probably don't remember every hour. You remember a few scenes, a view, a laugh, a meal, a moment of relief. And then often you remember the ending, the last night, the final drive, the airport, the goodbye. This is not because the rest didn't happen. It's because the brain is an editor, and one of its favorite tools is a shortcut, a simple rule of thumb. Keep the peak, keep the ending. Many psychologists describe this tendency as the peak-end pattern. It means we often judge experiences and later remember them based largely on their most intense moment and their final moment, not on the average of everything in between. This can make the past feel brighter than it was, because life is full of middles. Life is full of ordinary minutes, and ordinary minutes do not usually become peaks. They become texture. But when memory looks back, it prefers a highlight reel. It compresses. It selects. It gives you a story you can carry. So when you remember the 80s or 90s or Any earlier chapter, you may be remembering the peaks, the excitement, the novelty, the sense of possibility. You may be remembering the endings, the last day of school, the last summer before something changed, the last night before a move, and the long middle, the boredom, the awkwardness, the waiting that felt irritating at the time can fade into the background. This is one reason nostalgia feels cinematic. The lighting is better. The soundtrack is more meaningful. The scenes cut cleanly, and your brain, without intending to, has trimmed the mess. There is a kindness in this, but also a small illusion, because the past was never only peaks and endings. It was also laundry and arguments and ordinary afternoons that felt endless. It was also uncertainty and discomfort and moments you wanted to escape. If you forget that, nostalgia can become a trap. You can start to compare the clean highlight reel of then with the full, unedited reality of now, and now will always look messier. So we hold this insight gently. Nostalgia is not wrong. It is simply incomplete. It is a certain angle on the past, like light through a window at a specific time of day. And if you know that, you can enjoy the beauty without being fooled by it. You can say, yes, that was lovely, and yes, it was also complicated. Both can be true. In fact, the ability to hold both is part of emotional maturity. To love a memory without turning it into a weapon against the present. Tonight, we practice that balance. We let the peaks glow. We let the endings feel tender. And we remember that the middle mattered too, even if it wasn't dramatic, because the middle is where you became who you are. There is a gentle bias many minds carry, and it often shows up in nostalgia. When you look back, the rough parts can shrink. The beautiful parts can expand, and the whole chapter can take on a soft glow as if the light has been warmed. Psychologists sometimes call this rosy retrospection. It is the tendency to remember past experiences more positively than you experienced them in the moment. Not because you are dishonest, because your mind is trying to help you live. In the moment, discomfort demands attention. If something is irritating, painful, or uncertain, your brain flags it. It says, watch this, fix this, learn from this. Discomfort is information, and information matters for survival. But later, when the situation is no longer urgent, the brain may reduce the intensity of those unpleasant details. It doesn't need them at full volume anymore. Beauty, on the other hand, can be stored as a resource. A memory of a good day can become a small internal shelter. A memory of laughter can become a reminder of belonging. A memory of a peaceful place can become a calming image in a stressful year. So the mind tends to keep the warmth. It keeps the parts that help you regulate. This is why people can look back on hard periods and still miss them. They don't miss the hardship itself. They miss who they were with. They miss the simplicity of the goals. They miss the feeling of being in a particular stage of life, even if it was uncomfortable. In the 80s and 90s, it's common to remember the glow and forget the friction. You remember the music and forget the boredom. You remember the togetherness and forget the awkwardness. You remember the slowness and forget the frustration of waiting. And again, this is not a moral failure. It is a cognitive kindness. But it helps to see it clearly. Because if you believe the past was purely better, you will treat the present as a disappointment by default. And the present does not deserve that. The present contains beauty too, but it is harder to see because you are standing inside it with all its noise and chores and unfinished loops. The past is neat because it is finished. The present is messy because it is alive. So tonight, we practice a soft correction. When nostalgia rises, you can enjoy it. You can let it warm you. And you can also quietly remind yourself that chapter had hard days too. I am simply remembering the parts that help me feel safe. That reminder is not meant to ruin the feeling. It is meant to keep you free. Free to love the past without idealizing it. Free to live the present without resenting it. And perhaps free to create moments now that your future self will one day remember with the same gentle glow. Tonight, we follow nostalgia into one of its deepest purposes, identity. Not the surface version, the one you describe in a sentence, but the living version, the sense that you are the same you across years that have changed your face, your habits, your hopes. Human beings need continuity. Without it, life feels like a pile of disconnected scenes. With it, life becomes a story you can carry. Nostalgia is one of the ways the mind builds that continuity. It takes a moment from the past and quietly says, "This is still part of you." Even if your clothes are different now, even if the world speaks faster, even if your calendar is heavier, that earlier person is not gone. They are folded inside you like a letter kept safe. Sometimes nostalgia arrives as compassion. You remember yourself at a certain age, nervous, hopeful, trying to fit, trying to be brave in a way you didn't yet know how to name. And instead of judging that version of you, you feel tenderness. Because distance makes it easier to see that you were doing your best with what you had. That tenderness is not sentimental. It is healing. It is the nervous system loosening its grip on old self-criticism. It is the mind rewriting the story with more kindness. Nostalgia can also arrive as pride in a quiet form. You remember a difficulty you survived, and you realize you survived it. You remember how small you felt, and you notice how far you've traveled since then. Not to boast, just to recognize your own endurance. And endurance is one of the calmest sources of confidence there is. For many listeners, the 80s and 90s hold strong identity threads because those years contained so many early experiments. The first style you chose on purpose, the first music that felt like it belonged to you, the first friendships that felt like family, the first time you sensed your own values, even if you couldn't yet articulate them. But again, the decade is only the wrapper. The real ingredient is becoming. The years when you were discovering what you liked, what you couldn't tolerate, what kind of person you wanted to be. That discovery leaves marks. And nostalgia traces those marks, like fingertips over carved letters. Here is the gentle secret. You don't have to go back to feel whole. You only have to acknowledge that you have been many versions of yourself, and each version carried you forward. When you welcome those versions, the present stops feeling like a betrayal of the past. It becomes the next page. So tonight, if a younger you visits, don't push them away. Let them sit for a moment. Let them rest. You can tell them without words that you made it, that life continued, that you are here. And then, gently, invite them to walk with you into the present, where you can both exhale at the same time. Every so often, you notice the past returning in public. A song from decades ago appears in a new show. A familiar style reappears on a street you've never walked. A color palette, a haircut, a logo, a sound, and suddenly it feels as if time is looping. This is cultural nostalgia, and it moves like a tide. Part of it is simple economics. Old stories are less risky than new ones because people already recognize them. Familiarity lowers the mind's guard. It says, I know this. And when the world feels uncertain, I know this is a kind of comfort. But culture is also made of people, and people carry memories. When a generation reaches a certain age, it begins to look back with more tenderness. The years that once felt ordinary begin to look meaningful. And creators, musicians, designers, filmmakers, they bring that tenderness into what they make. So a decade can return not because it was objectively better, but because the people who lived it are now old enough to translate it into art. The 80s and 90s reappear so often, partly for that reason. They sit at a sweet spot, close enough to feel personal, far enough to feel mythic. They contain technology that is recognizable but not current, which makes it easier to romanticize. They contain fashion that is bold enough to be playful, and they contain shared media moments that many people remember together, which makes nostalgia feel communal instead of solitary. But behind all of that is a deeper mechanism. The mind tends to like what is slightly familiar and slightly new. Too familiar becomes dull. Too new becomes exhausting. So culture often remixes the past, adding just enough novelty to make it feel fresh while keeping the comfort of recognition. It's a little like returning to a childhood home that has been repainted. The layout is the same, but the light is different. And there is also a social reason nostalgia spreads. When you share a reference, you share a shortcut into belonging. A single old chorus can make strangers smile at the same time. A single object can produce a small, knowing laugh. Shared nostalgia becomes a language, and language builds community. So if you notice the past showing up around you, you don't have to resist it. You can simply understand what it offers. It offers a bridge between people. It offers a pause from the strain of constant novelty. It offers a gentle reminder that time moves in waves, not straight lines. And if you let it, it can make you feel less alone in your own remembering, even on an ordinary night. Next, we'll move to a newer kind of nostalgia, the kind that lives in your phone, where the past can be summoned instantly, sometimes too easily, like a door that never fully closes. There was a time when the past stayed mostly where it belonged, in boxes, in albums, in drawers you had to choose to open. Now, the past can tap you on the shoulder while you're buying groceries. It can appear on a screen with a simple sentence, a memory from this day. Digital nostalgia is convenient, and it is strange because it changes the relationship between remembering and time. When memories were scarce, you approached them with intention. You prepared yourself the way you might prepare to enter a quiet room. But when memories are abundant and automatic, they can feel less like a room and more like a hallway you are constantly walking through. Photos, videos, messages, old playlists, old emails, the archive is endless, and the endlessness can be comforting. It can also be heavy because the mind was not built to carry a perfect record. It was built to carry meaning, to keep the emotional headlines and let the rest fade. That fading is not a flaw. It is part of how we heal. Some memories soften because they need to. Some details disappear because they are no longer useful. Digital life sometimes interrupts that softening. A photo resurfaces before you are ready. A message thread reappears like a ghost of a conversation. A remember when arrives on a day when you're trying to be brave. This doesn't mean digital nostalgia is bad. It means it is powerful, and power needs gentleness. There is also a subtle shift in how we perform our lives when we know everything is being recorded. We take photos of sunsets instead of letting the sunset settle into the body. We document moments for the future instead of fully living them in the present. And later, we may feel nostalgic for the moment we were too busy capturing. That is one of the odd paradoxes of modern remembering. The past becomes more visible, but sometimes less felt. And yet, digital nostalgia also offers gifts. It helps you remember people you might have lost touch with. It shows you proof of growth. It gives you a timeline when your inner sense of time feels blurry. It can remind you that you have had good days, even when you can't access that feeling easily. So the practice is not to reject the archive. It is to relate to it wisely, to choose sometimes not to click, to curate what returns, to keep certain memories private, to let the mind do what it does best, compress, edit, heal. If nostalgia is a lantern, digital nostalgia can become a spotlight, and spotlights can be too bright. So tonight, imagine dimming it, keeping the warmth, releasing the glare. In the next segment, we'll talk about the gentle risk of nostalgia, how it can slip from comfort into avoidance, and how to notice that shift without judgment, like noticing the tide turning. Nostalgia becomes difficult when it stops being a place you visit and becomes a place you hide. This doesn't happen because you are weak. It happens because the feeling is effective. It gives relief quickly, and anything that gives relief quickly can become tempting. The shift is usually subtle. At first, nostalgia is a warm cup. You sip it and you feel steadier. But then, on a harder day, you sip more and more. And without meaning to, you begin to compare your present to a version of the past that has been polished by memory. The present, unedited and alive, will always lose that comparison. So the past becomes a refuge, and the present begins to feel like a disappointment. This is the moment to be gentle, not harsh, because the mind is trying to protect you from pain. The question is not, why am I nostalgic? The question is, what am I avoiding? Sometimes it's grief. Sometimes it's loneliness. Sometimes it's fear of the future. Sometimes it's exhaustion. Sometimes it's the pressure of becoming someone. And the old chapter feels simpler because the expectations were smaller. In those moments, nostalgia can signal a need for rest, a need for connection, a need for rhythm, a need for meaning. You can meet that need directly without turning the past into a permanent home. There are small signs that nostalgia is turning into avoidance. You feel irritated by the present as a default. You replay old scenes as if they are the only safe place. You scroll through memories compulsively, hoping for relief, and feel emptier afterward. You speak of back then with bitterness instead of tenderness. If you notice these signs, you don't have to panic. You can simply pause and name what is happening. This is my mind reaching for safety. Then you can offer the mind a different form of safety. A slow breath, a warm drink, a message to someone you trust, a short walk, a simple ritual that belongs to now. Because the goal is not to stop remembering. The goal is to remember without abandoning the present. The past can be a teacher. It can be a comfort. It can be a reminder of your resilience. But it cannot be lived again, and it does not need to be. You can honor it without moving into it. Tonight, let nostalgia be a visitor. Let it sit for a moment, tell you what it came to tell you, and then let it leave with kindness. Because you are not meant to live in yesterday. You are meant to live in the only place where you can still grow, right here, in today. In the final segment, we'll gather everything gently and talk about how to use nostalgia well, how to turn it into gratitude, connection, and calm, and then return to sleep with the present feeling like home. Now we come to the quiet closing, where nostalgia can become something wise. Not a hook in your chest, not a door you keep trying to push open, a lantern, a soft light that helps you see what mattered, so you can bring a little of it forward. Because that is the healthiest way to use nostalgia, not as escape, but as nourishment. If a memory returns tonight, you can ask it a simple question. What are you trying to give me? Sometimes the answer is connection, a reminder that you were loved, that you belonged, that you laughed until your face hurt. If that is what the memory offers, let it inspire one small act in the present, a message to someone you miss, a decision to show up with warmth. Sometimes the answer is rhythm, a reminder of a pace that felt breathable. If that is what the memory offers, build a small boundary for tomorrow. One pause, one walk, one moment without scrolling. Sometimes the answer is play, a reminder that your mind once wandered more freely. If that is what the memory offers, allow a little play now. A few pages of reading, a song heard without multitasking. Sometimes the answer is identity, a reminder of who you have been. If that is what the memory offers, meet your younger self with tenderness instead of judgment, and say quietly, "Thank you for carrying me to this point." A small piece of the past can live in you without taking over you. This is where nostalgia becomes gratitude. Gratitude is the warmer sibling of longing. Longing says, "I wish it were here again." Gratitude says, "I'm glad it was here at all." And gratitude has a way of softening the ache. If you want, try a simple practice right now. Think of one memory that returns often. Not the sharpest one, a gentle one. Notice what it highlights. A person, a place, a feeling of safety. Then choose one small way to honor it in the present, even if only in your mind. And if the 80s or 90s show up, let them be what they are. Colors your memory likes to wear. Let the glow be warm, but not blinding. Let the time capsule open, and then close gently like a book placed back on the shelf. Because the goal of tonight is not to live in the past, it is to feel steady in the present. Take a slow breath and feel the bed beneath you. Notice the simple fact of now, the weight of your body, the quiet of the room, the steady work of your heart. The past can be loved, and still you can come home to this moment where nothing is required of you except rest. To remember that you are continuous, that you have roots and you have growth. So, as you settle deeper into sleep, let nostalgia become quiet and kind. Let it fade into the background like music in another room. Let the present hold you just as it is, without needing to be perfect. Good night.